The stars above Jeju 3 were not the clean, sharp points of light seen from Earth. Here, at the edge of human-explored space, they shimmered behind the thin veil of the planet's atmosphere, a soft and peaceful sight. Sumin liked that. It made her work in the hydroponic greenhouse feel less lonely. She carefully adjusted the nutrient feed for the genetically modified sweet potatoes, a piece of home on this new world. Her older brother, Jay, was light years away. He worked with words, not plants. On board the Tarkellan flagship Resolute Vigil, he listened. His job was to understand the galaxy. The Tarkellans were large, with tough, gray hide and eyes that held the weight of long wars. They were respected members of the Galactic Federation. Humans were not. Humans were the new ones, the soft ones, the ones who used clever tools to hide their weak bodies. Jay sat at a small terminal in a quiet corner of the ship's bustling command center. He studied the Tarkellan language. It had 3 words for obligation, each with a different weight. The heaviest one, Karva, meant a debt written in blood and honor, a bond that could not be broken until it was perfectly balanced. He found it beautiful and a little frightening. Captain Vlar stood on the command platform. His 4-fingered hands were clasped behind his back. On the main viewer, a tactical map showed a line of red icons, the KRYLL swarm. They were a scourge, a species that consumed worlds. The Resolute Vigil and its fleet were part of a fighting retreat. The KRYLL had ambushed them at the Gamma Corvi junction. Now, the Tarkellans were falling back to a defensive position, licking their wounds. "Captain," his sensor officer clicked. "We are picking up a new signal. Off our planned path. It is a distress call." Vlar turned. "Origin. A small colony world. Designation. Jeju 3. It is a human settlement." A low murmur went through the bridge.
Humans.
The word carried a sense of fragility.
Ambassador Krien, Atal, Slender Ixian, drifted closer to Velar.
His large, dark eyes were cool. "A human colony. Their defenses will be paper. The KRYLL will erase them in moments. A tragedy, but it is not our mission. Our duty is to preserve the fleet." On the viewer, the distress call was translated. It was a simple automated loop. "We are under attack. KRYLL vessels in atmosphere. Civilian shelters compromised. Please, anyone." Then, a burst of raw audio, the sounds of explosions, of screaming, and a voice, a young human female's voice, shouting, "The eastern greenhouse dome is breached. I can't. The seal is failing." Jay froze at his terminal. The voice was filtered through static, but the terror was universal. He stood up without thinking. Every eye on the bridge turned to him. He was the only human there. Captain Vlar looked from the desperate signal to the tactical map. His retreat path was clear. Engaging meant turning his wounded fleet toward a KRYLL hunting party for no strategic gain. It was illogical. His first officer looked at him, waiting for the order to jump to faster-than-light speed. Vlar remembered his own hatchlings, safe on the Tarkellan homeworld. He thought of the concept of Karva. He thought of leaving 50,000 beings to die when he had the power to intervene. His honor, the soul of his people, revolted at the idea. "Change course," Vlar said, his voice a deep rumble that silenced the bridge. "Maximum sublight speed. All weapons to ready status. Prepare drop ships for civilian evacuation." Ambassador Kreen hissed in disapproval. "Captain, this is a direct violation of your orders. You are risking the entire fleet for a handful of primitives." Vlar turned, his broad shoulders squaring. "They are not primitives, Ambassador. They are lives, and they are calling for help. That creates an obligation. Plot the intercept." As the massive warships turned, groaning from the stress, Jay felt his heart hammering. He rushed to the communications station. "Let me speak to them. I can calm them, guide them." Down on Jeju 3, the world was fire and noise. Sumin lay on the floor of the shattered greenhouse, her leg pinned under a fallen support beam. The air was getting thin and cold. Through the cracked polymer glass, she saw the dark, insect-like shapes of KRYLL skimmers buzzing, firing green energy bolts into the settlement. Then, streaks of blue light lanced down from the sky, striking the skimmers from above. Something huge and angular blotted out the sun. A Tarkellan cruiser, its hull scarred and smoking, but its guns speaking with thunderous authority. Drop ships fell from its belly like stones. They landed hard, ramps slamming down. Out came not humans, but giants of gray stone. Tarkellan Marines moved with surprising speed, their heavy rifles blasting Carwell warriors into chitinous fragments. One of them, larger than the others, directed his squad. He saw the collapsed greenhouse and moved toward it. This was Vlar. He had led the drop ship himself. He used his sheer strength to heave the beam off Sumin's leg. She stared up, terrified, at this alien giant. He made a soft clicking sound, a Tarkellan gesture for no harm. Gently, he lifted her and carried her to the waiting drop ship, shielding her with his own body from stray fire. He placed her inside, among other crying, shocked human colonists. He looked at her, gave a single, slow nod, and then turned back to the fight, bellowing orders. "I in orbit." Jay watched the rescue unfold on the screens, coordinating shelter locations. He saw his people saved by these strangers who owed them nothing. His heart swelled with a gratitude so deep it hurt. Hours later, the last Carwell were gone. The colony was saved. On the bridge of the Resolute Vigil, Captain Vlar stood before Jay and a hologram of the Jeju 3 colony leader. The captain placed a fist over his heart, a Tarkellan gesture of profound gravity. "The Carwell took many of my crew today in this diversion," Vlar said, his voice tired, "but we have saved 50,000 of your people. Remember this. A debt has been created. Karva, your lives are now tied to our honor. One day it must be balanced." The colony leader thanked him profusely. Jay bowed deeply, understanding the word Karva now more than any translation could convey. He felt the weight of it settle on all of humanity. As the Tarkellan fleet, weaker now, limped back toward Federation space, Ambassador Kreen watched the planet shrink on the viewer. He shook his head, speaking mostly to himself. A costly waste. What can a species of short-lived, fragile creatures possibly do to ever repay a Karva written in Tarkellan blood? The debt will just hang there, forever unpaid. He did not see Jay, standing in the shadow of the doorway, his eyes fixed on the stars where the Carwell had fled. Jay did not speak, but in his mind he was already beginning the calculations. The Grand Conclave Hall of the Galactic Federation was a masterpiece of alien architecture. Soaring arches of light met in a ceiling that showed a real-time map of the galaxy. Representatives from 100 species sat or floated in their designated areas. The human delegation had a small section near the back. It was practical, but it felt like a statement. Jay and Mira stood at their console. Myra's hands moved quickly, arranging data files. She was an engineer. She liked problems she could see and fix. The problem now was the silent, polite dismissal that filled the air. It was harder to fix than a broken plasma coil. Captain Vlar stood at the central speaking platform. His wounds from Jeju 3 were healed, but he moved a little slower. He spoke of the bravery of his crew, of the lives lost. He finished by gesturing to the humans. The debt of Karva exists. The humans have stated their desire to repay it. We must hear their offer. Ambassador Kreen of the Ixians was the first to respond. His voice was smooth, like oil over water. "A noble sentiment, Captain, and one we all share. But repayment must be practical. It must aid our collective survival." He turned his large, dark eyes toward the humans. "What can your species contribute to a war of this scale?" Mira stepped forward. Her voice was clear. "We have analyzed the engagement data from the Battle of Gamma Corvi and the skirmish at Jeju 3. Your energy shields are powerful, but they have a modulation pattern. The KRYLL weapons adapt to it within 43 minutes of combat. We have designed a counter-algorithm. It makes the shield modulation unpredictable. It would increase shield effectiveness by at least 20%. She sent the data packet. It appeared on every screen. It was elegant, complex mathematics. The Tarkellan engineers studied it. One of them gave a slow nod of respect, but Ambassador Kreen waved a long-fingered hand. A clever trick, but our shield systems are based on organic crystal growth. Your software would be like trying to teach a tree a new dance. It is not compatible with our fundamental technology. A good effort, but not practical. Jay felt a knot form in his stomach. He stepped up next. Then let us offer understanding. We have studied all available KRYLL communications and battle records. They are not a mindless swarm. They have a psychology, a hierarchy based on dominance displays. We believe we can predict their tactical choices by analyzing the boast structures in their pre-battle transmissions. He displayed his work. It showed patterns, links between certain kinds of threats and specific fleet maneuvers. It was a work of xenolinguistics and psychology. A Balaxian representative, a being of dense muscle, snorted. It sounded like rocks grinding. You predict them by listening to their songs? We fight them with plasma and bone. Your ideas are soft like your bodies. War is not a conversation. A ripple of agreement went through many of the delegations. The KRWLL were a force of nature, to be met with stronger force. Human ideas seemed like trying to stop a flood with cleverly arranged sand. The council moved on to other matters. Requests for more warships from the mineral-rich Gron, promises of new bioarmor from the insectoid hive of Silix. Each offer was tangible, heavy, real. A human offer of prediction models or software patches seemed like offering a glass of water to a house on fire. After the session, Jay and Mira walked through the gleaming corridors. They passed a group of Tarkellan junior officers. The officers saw them, placed fists to chests in the gesture of Karva, and walked on. The respect was still there, but it was mixed with pity. The debt was a chain around the Tarkellan honor, and the humans had nothing strong enough to break it. Mira was sent to the primary Federation shipyards, not to design but to repair. Her team and other human engineers were given the lowest-grade maintenance tasks on damaged Tarkellan cruisers. They worked in the dark, oily undersides of the great vessels, replacing burnt-out power conduits that stronger species had snapped under strain point one day. A Tarkellan foreman watched Mira spend an hour carefully realigning a fractured energy relay that a Gron engineer would have just ripped out and thrown away. The foreman, named Vor, clicked softly. "You are precise. You waste nothing." Mira wiped grease from her cheek. The part wasn't dead, just injured. It just needed to be reminded how to work. She had used a series of tiny electrical pulses to coax the crystalline structure back into alignment. Vor was silent for a moment. "This is a human way? To fix instead of replace." "It is when you come from a world with limited resources," Mira said. "You learn to make things last. You learn how things break, down to their smallest part." She tapped the now-glowing relay. "This fails under harmonic vibration at exactly 14.7 kHz. The KRYLL particle beams create a vibration at 14.6. It's a slow poison. Your standard diagnostics miss it." Vor's hide changed color slightly, a sign of surprise. He took the data pad she offered. This was not just repair. It was deep, systemic understanding. But when he presented the finding to his superiors, they thanked him and filed it away. A single relay failure was a speck in the grand scheme of the war. Back on the diplomatic station, Jay faced Ambassador Kreen in a quiet meeting room. "The offer of military aid seems unfeasible," Kreen said, not unkindly. "Perhaps the debt can be reconceptualized. A token shipment of your colony's agricultural produce for our wounded. A ceremonial gesture to satisfy honor." Jay kept his face still. He understood. To Kreen, the debt was now an awkward social problem to be solved with a symbolic gesture. To the Tarkellans like Vlar, it was a sacred, unbalanced weight. To Jay and Mira, it was becoming something else. It was a detailed list. A list of their offers, and every time they were called soft, clever, or not practical. A list of the condescending smiles from the Balaxians. A list of the times Myra's repair teams were given the most dangerous, menial work. "We will consider your suggestion, Ambassador," Jay said, his voice perfectly polite. Later, in their small shared quarters, Mira looked at Jay. Her hands were still stained from the shipyard. "They don't want our solutions," she said. No, Jay agreed, looking out at the stars. They don't understand the currency we're trying to pay them with. They see a weak species offering thoughts and tricks. They don't see the audit. The what? Mira asked. We are learning, Jay said softly. Every repair you make, you learn how their ships truly work. Every dismissal in that hall, I learn what they value and what they scorn. We are not just fixing ships or talking. We are reading the ledger. And the debt is not getting smaller. He turned to her. It is accumulating interest. Mira nodded slowly. The gratitude for Jeju 3 was warm in her heart. But the cold, professional scorn of the Federation was banking into something else. They were not warriors. They were not giants. But they were meticulous. And they were learning the cost of everything. The mood in the Grand Conclave Hall had turned to ice. For weeks, the news from the front had grown worse. Now it was catastrophic. On the massive central viewer, a shaky feed showed the Tarkellan homeworld. Swarms of KRLL ships, like black locusts, filled the space around the green and blue planet. Defensive stations were bright, silent explosions. Captain Vlar was not there. His fleet, the Resolute Vigil and the last of the Tarkellan line, had been sent to slow the KRYLL advance at the Serpentis Nebula. There had been no updates for 26 hours. Ambassador Kreen stood at the speaking platform. His usual smooth confidence was gone. His long fingers trembled slightly. The Ixian High Council, he announced, his voice thin, has concluded that further resistance is illogical. Our collective forces are at 18% of pre-war strength. The KRYLL are at 140%. They have absorbed our technologies, our tactics. To continue is to ensure the extinction of more species. He took a breath, the air hissing through his delicate nostrils. We must open channels. We must sue for terms of surrender. A stunned silence filled the hall. Then, noise erupted. The Grand representative roared in anger. The Silix delegates chittered in fear. The Balaxian pounded his console, cracking it. It was chaos. The dream of the Federation was dying in that room. Jay watched from the human console. He had been compiling transmission logs from Serpentis. The last signals from the Tarkellan fleet. They were not clean military reports. They were fragments, desperate, often just the sound of screams and tearing metal before they cut off. He had listened to every second. He had catalogued each ship's name as it went silent. As the arguments raged, Jay stood up. He did not shout. He simply walked to the empty speaking platform. No one noticed the small human at first. He activated the platform's sound system. A soft, clear chime rang out, cutting through the noise. All eyes turned to him. They held confusion, annoyance, desperation. Who was this human? What now? Jay said nothing. He tapped his data pad. On the giant central viewer, the image of the burning Tarkellan homeworld was replaced by a simple, stark document. At the top, it read, Account. Obligation of Jeju 3. The Galactic Federation has dismissed our offers of payment. Jay began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner. You found them impractical. He pointed to the document. But a debt does not disappear when the creditor refuses the currency. It remains. It grows. He zoomed in on the first column. Here is the principle. 50,412 human lives. Saved by the Tarkellan Shield Fleet under Captain Vlar at the colony Jeju 3. A life debt. Akarva. He scrolled down. The list grew. Here is the interest. 1,344 Tarkellan lives lost during that rescue mission. He paused. They were the first payment on our behalf. A new section appeared. Here is the compounded interest. The Battle of the Serpentis Nebula. He pressed a button. A list began to scroll, faster and faster. Ship names. The Resolute Vigil. The Stone Defender. The Honors Price. Hundreds of them. Next to each name, a timestamp of its last transmission. We have been listening, Jay said, the words dropping like stones. From our small listening posts, from our repair tenders near the nebula's edge. We heard every ship die. They died because they saved us. Their retreat path was revealed after Jeju 3. The KRYLL hunted them for it. These deaths. He stopped the scroll. The list was terrifyingly long. These deaths are now part of the obligation. Ambassador Kreen found his voice. This is a grotesque accounting. This is not the time for your cultural rituals. Can you not see we are facing annihilation? Jay turned his head slowly to look at Kreen. We see it. We have been auditing it. You call it a ritual. We call it a balance sheet. And it is severely unbalanced. He straightened his shoulders. The human species hereby formally activates Article 14 of our Reciprocity Accords. We will now settle the account. The Balaxian laughed, a harsh, broken sound. With what? Your clever words? Your algorithms? Go back to your corner, little human. The adults are trying to decide how to die. At that moment, Myra's voice came through the hall's comms, clear and firm. She was not in the hall. She was somewhere else. Channel open. Visual feed ready. Jay gave a small, final nod. You asked with what? On the main viewer, the ledger disappeared. It was replaced by a live feed. It showed space, the dark swirl of the Serpentis Nebula as a backdrop. And in front of it, hanging silently in the void, were ships. They were not Federation ships. They were human vessels. Sleek where others were bulky, angular where others were rounded. They were not large. A few were cruiser-sized, but most were frigates, destroyers, tenders. They looked fragile. Their hulls were not thick biotech or dense alloy, but a layered, ceramic plate armor. There were hundreds of them. They had been sitting there, dark and silent, listening to the same dying calls Jay had cataloged. A gasp went through the hall. They had been detected by no one. Their energy signatures were whisper quiet, their hulls scattering sensor beams. This, Jay said, is the repayment fleet. They have been waiting. They have heard every cry from Serpentis. They have recorded the signature of every KRYLL weapon that fired, the engine pattern of every KRYLL ship that attacked. The human ships began to move, not in a grand battle formation but spreading out in a complex web-like pattern. Small, dart-like craft detached from the motherships. They looked like tools, not weapons. Ambassador Kreen stared, his large eyes wide with a new kind of fear. This was not a gesture. This was not a plea for respect. It was a cold, pre-planned action. The humans had not come to the Federation for permission to help. They had come to give a statement of intent. What are they doing? Whispered the Grand Delegate. They are balancing the books, Jay said, his work done. He stepped down from the platform and walked toward the exit. The eyes of the galaxy were no longer on him. They were fixed on the screen, on the strangely quiet, strangely menacing human fleet positioning itself in the graveyard of the Tarkellan heroes. The humans were not declaring war on the KRYLL. They were announcing a foreclosure. The KRYLL swarm that descended upon the Serpentis Nebula was not a battle fleet. It was a cleaning crew. Their scanners had detected the small, strange vessels floating near the debris of the Tarkellan fleet. The energy signatures were weak. The ship designs were unfamiliar and seemed fragile. The KRYLL command saw an opportunity for an easy victory, a chance to crush the last symbol of hope before the Federation surrendered. They came in their standard hunting pattern. A wave of sleek, insectoid skirmishers shot ahead, their weapons charging with a sickly green light. Behind them, heavier cruisers pulsed with gravity weapons that could crumple armor. On the bridge of the human command ship, the steadfast calculator, Mira watched them come. Her fingers danced over a holographic interface that showed not just ships, but a web of data, stress points, resonance frequencies, chemical compositions. It was the data she and thousands of other engineers had gathered over years of repair work, now fused with Jay's analysis of KRYLL communication patterns. Targets designated. A comm voice said over the comms. Nano-disassembly swarms. Launch. Frequency broadcast. Initiate. The human ships did not fire missiles or energy beams. From their undersides, they released clouds of what looked like metallic dust. The clouds spread silently toward the advancing KRYLL skirmishers. The KRYLL ignored it, firing their first volley. The green bolts streaked toward the human vessels. Then, 100 kilometers out, they hit an invisible, shimmering field. The field did not just block the energy. It absorbed it, flickered with a rainbow of colors, and then shot it back along the exact same path. The reflected bolts struck the lead KRYL ships, overloading their own shields in a chain of bright, confused explosions. Before the KRYL could process this, the metallic dust reached them. It settled on their hulls. To the KRYL, it was nothing. Then their ships began to decay. The dust was a storm of tiny machines, each one programmed to find the specific molecular bonds of KRYL hull alloy. They did not blast or burn. They separated, atom from atom. The outer hulls of the skirmishers simply turned into gray powder, streaming off into the void, exposing the delicate inner systems to the cold vacuum. Ships went dead and silent, drifting tombs dot on the Federation station. The Grand Conclave Hall was dead quiet. Every screen was tuned to the live feed from Serpentis. They watched the KRYL attack fail. They watched the strange dust do its work. There were no roaring engines, no heroic charges. It was a silent, clinical dismantling. The KRYL cruisers, further back, unleashed their gravity weapons. Pulses of distorted space raced toward the human fleet, meant to crush them into balls of scrap. Mira saw the pulses on her screen. Resonance adjustment. Ready. Fire solution. Echo. The human frigates moved. They did not dodge. They positioned themselves precisely. As the gravity pulse hit, their layered ceramic hulls vibrated. Instead of crumpling, they acted like tuning forks. They absorbed the gravitational energy, modulated it, and fired it back as a focus beam of spatial distortion, but now aimed with perfect accuracy at the joints between the KRYL cruiser's engine pods and their main hulls. The result was not an explosion. It was a precise, terrible shearing. Engine pods twisted away from ships, tearing free in showers of silent debris. The KRYL cruisers were left as dead, drifting hulks. Captain Vlar was on the station now, rescued from the edge of the nebula in a life pod. He stood beside Ambassador Kreen, his gray hide pale with shock. He had fought the KRYL for a decade. He had never seen anything like this. War was an exchange of fury, of courage, of damage taken and given. This was not war. This was targeted deletion. What are they doing? Vlar whispered, not to Kreen, but to himself. On the bridge of the calculator. Mira answered as if she had heard him. Her voice was calm, focused on the work. KRYL Heavy Cruiser, designation Scourge of Ixia. Primary weapon, torsion cannon. Weakness. The cannon's focusing array requires a crystalline element that shatters at a sustained harmonic of 14.6 kHz. She had learned this fixing a damaged Tarkellen sensor that had recorded the frequency years ago. Broadcast the harmonic. Isolate that ship. A nearby human tender began to transmit a seemingly innocuous radio signal. To the Scourge of Ixia, it was like a hammer hitting glass. Its main weapon array cracked internally, then exploded, ripping a hole in the ship's side. It listed powerless. Kreen was trembling. This is dishonorable. This is not combat. Vlar looked at the Ixian, a slow anger building in him. They are using knowledge, Kreen. The knowledge we called impractical. The knowledge we refused. He watched as a human frigate used a focused energy beam not to pierce armor, but to superheat the coolant lines on a KRYL carrier, causing it to vent its toxic fluids into its own hangar bay. They learned how our ships break while fixing them, and they learned how the KRYL ships break by watching them kill us. For every weakness we ever showed, for every weakness the KRYL ever had, they have a correction. The battle, if it could be called that, was over in minutes. The KRYL force was not defeated in a fight. It was systematically taken apart system by system, ship by ship. The human fleet moved with a chilling, unhurried efficiency. They did not cheer. They did not pursue the few fleeing ships. They simply stopped. Hanging in the silence they had created. Myra's face appeared on the main viewer in the conclave hall. There was no triumph in her eyes, only the focused look of an engineer who has completed a complex task. The immediate threat to the Serpentis position is neutralized. The ledger entry for the Tarkellan vessels lost here has been addressed. Preliminary balance. 23 KRYLL vessels destroyed in direct correlation to the 23 Tarkellan capital ships lost. The interest is not yet fully paid. She looked directly into the feed, and it felt like she was looking at every single representative. The principle remains 50,412 lives. The KRYLL Empire still holds that debt. We will now collect. The screen went back to the view of the silent human fleet, surrounded by the dead and broken ships of the enemy. The hall remained silent. The dread was no longer about the KRYLL. It was about the quiet, precise, and utterly relentless accountants now hovering in the darkness, their calculators now weapons, their ledger written in fire. The response from the KRYLL Empire was not a surprise. They were a predator species. A challenge to their dominance had to be met with overwhelming force. They would not attack the human fleet at Serpentis directly again. They would go for the source. They would burn the human colonies one by one and show the galaxy what happened to those who dared to fight back. The first target was New Jiangju, a large agricultural colony. A KRYLL battle group, 3 times the size of the one at Serpentis, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They broadcast a simple message on all frequencies. A raw screech of triumph and threat on New Jiangju. Alarms sounded. People ran to shelters. But there was no panic. The instructions had been clear. For months, since the news of Jeju 3 and Serpentis, Myra's engineering protocols had been shared with every human world. They were not building giant shield domes or plasma cannons. They were making adjustments. The KRYLL fleet surged toward the planet. Their weapons glowed, ready to fire on the cities below. Then the planetary defense network activated. It did not look like one. To the KRYLL sensors, it appeared as a series of mundane communication and weather satellites. But as the KRYLL ships entered high orbit, these satellites hummed to life. They did not fire weapons. They emitted a complex, layered series of energy pulses and gravitational nudges. On the ground, Mira monitored the feed from a buried command center. Her hands were steady. Orbital harmonic resonance. Active. Target their formation cohesion. The lead KRYLL cruiser shuddered. Its engines fired, but its course wobbled. The ship next to it did the same, but in a different direction. The precise, coordinated attack formation began to fall apart. The satellites were using the KRYLL's own engine signatures against them, creating a zone of conflicting gravitational pulls that turned orderly lines into confusion. They are attempting to target the satellites, a technician said. Redirect their fire. Mira replied. A KRYLL destroyer locked onto a satellite and fired. The green energy bolt lanced down. At the last second, a small, human-made relay station near the satellite projected a brief, intense energy field. The bolt hit the field, refracted, and bounced back up. Not at the destroyer that fired it, but at the engines of the carrier vessel beside it. The carrier's shields flared and failed under the unexpected friendly fire. The KRYLL commanders screeched in frustration. They ordered a full bombardment to blast through the Trix.as, their heavy weapons charged. The weather control arrays on New Jiangju activated. These were machines meant to manage hurricanes and droughts. Now, they focused on a single point in the upper atmosphere, directly above the largest KRYLL ship. They superheated the air, creating a sudden, massive storm cell. Lightning, far more powerful than natural lightning, arced upward into space, drawn to the charged weapons of the KRYLL vessel. The ship was engulfed in a crackling cage of planetary energy. Its systems frying. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration. The planet itself seemed to fight back, using the KRYLL's own aggression as fuel. Every attack was turned against them. Energy beams were reflected. Missiles were lured into gravitational pits and dragged into the sun. Fighter drones were confused by swirling magnetic fields and crashed into each other. After an hour, the crippled KRYLL fleet broke off and fled. New Jiangju was untouched. Not a single human weapon had fired. Not a single missile had been launched from the surface. Across the galaxy, the Federation watched the feeds in stunned disbelief. Ambassador Kreen could not speak. The Balaxians simply stared, his earlier laughter now a distant, foolish memory. Captain Vlar watched with a soldier's eye. He saw the truth. "They are not defending the planet," he said, his voice rough. "They are defending the people. The colony, the farms, the homes, they are the principal. The KRYLL are trying to damage the asset. The humans are protecting it with everything else. They are using the environment as a shield. They are using the enemy's power as a weapon." On the KRYLL command ship, fleeing the new Jiangju system, the admiral was in a rage. But beneath the rage was a new, cold thread of fear. They had not fought an enemy. They had fought a system, a logic. Every move they made had been predicted and used against them. It was like trying to punch water. The KRYLL High Command made a decision. If they could not destroy human colonies, they would destroy human morale. They would find the symbolic heart. They identified a target, the Jeju system, the place where this madness had begun. A massive invasion fleet, the largest since the assault on the Tarkelian homeworld, was assembled. They would reduce Jeju 3 to glass and ash. They would show the galaxy that the human defiance was a fleeting spark. The fleet arrived. The planet hung below, blue and green, peaceful. There were no weather satellites here, no energy fields. The skies were clear. The KRYLL moved in, cautious but determined. They reached low orbit. They prepared to unleash hell. Then, from the dark side of the planet's moon, a single, small human ship emerged. It was a simple courier vessel. It broadcast a tight beam message to the KRYLL flagship. The message contained no words. It was just a sound. It was the sound of the distress call from Jeju 3, from the day Captain Vlar had saved them. The sound of screams, of explosions, and the voice of a young woman, Sumin, crying for help. Then a second audio file played. It was the identified voice of the KRYLL subcommander who had led that initial attack on Jeju 3, boasting of the easy hunt. The message ended. The small ship turned and slipped back behind the moon. For a long moment, the KRYLL fleet hung there, silent. Then, every alarm on every ship blared at once. Their targeting systems had gone insane, painting their own vessels as enemies. Their communication channels, filled with the recorded screams from Jeju 3, played at a volume that drowned out all other signals. Their navigation computers displayed false star maps, showing them to be in the heart of a black hole. It was not an attack. It was a haunting, a reminder, a bill presented at the scene of the original crime. In chaos, the KRYLL fleet fired on each other, on empty space, on illusions. By the time they regained partial control and fled, they had lost a third of their number to their own panic. The message was received. The humans were not just defending, they were collecting, and they had perfect, unforgiving memories. The humiliation at Jeju 3 was the final insult the KRYLL Empire could bear. Every instinct of their predatory culture demanded one thing: a direct, crushing confrontation to erase the human stain. They would no longer play the humans' game of mirrors and ghosts. They would gather every warship, every fighter, into a single massive fist. Their target was Serpentis. They would destroy the human fleet where it floated and broadcast its death to a terrified galaxy. Across KRYLL space, ships disengaged from blockades and patrols. It was the largest armada assembled in living memory, a dark tide flowing toward the nebula. The Federation's remaining sensors tracked the movement. It was a force that could smash planets. Ambassador Kreen declared it was over. The human defiance had only sped up the end. On the bridge of the steadfast calculator, Mira watched the strategic map. A swirling mass of red icons converged on their position. It was the battle the Federation had always wanted humanity to fight and lose, a sheer test of power. "They're committing everything," her tactical officer said, his voice tense. "Good," Mira replied, her eyes on the data streams. "It simplifies the accounting. Prepare final sequence. Designation: ledgers close." The human fleet did not scatter. It did not fortify. It formed a loose, wide sphere around the nebula's edge. The ships looked terribly small against the approaching swarm. The KRYLL entered the system and saw their enemy waiting. A screech of triumph echoed across their comms. This was a language even the Federation could understand. The KRYL charged. A wave of chitin and green fire. The first human line fired. Their weapons were not impressive, precise lasers, kinetic projectiles. They scratched the lead KRYL ships but did little damage. The KRYL shields held. The Predator's confidence swelled. This was the true weakness. This was the end. They plunged deeper into the human formation, surrounding the smaller vessels, their weapons finding their targets. Human ships began to die. Plates of ceramic armor shattered. Hulls vented air in silent plumes. On the Federation feeds, hearts sank. This was the predictable, tragic outcome they had always foreseen. Captain Vlar, watching, felt his own heart crack. He saw bravery in the human stand, but he saw futility. They had traded cleverness for a doomed last stand. Then, something changed. A human frigate, the unyielding proof, was crippled, drifting. A KRYL destroyer moved in for the kill. As the destroyer fired its final shot, the unyielding proof emitted a final, powerful burst of data. Not a distress call, but a compressed transmission. The transmission shot across space and was instantly picked up and rebroadcast by every other human ship, and by hidden relays throughout the nebula. On the Federation viewer, a new window opened. It was a detailed schematic of the attacking KRYL destroyer. Every system, every weakness, the chemical signature of its hull, the frequency of its shield generator, the name of its commander, and a list of the Tarkellan ships it had destroyed at Serpentis. The data was clear, open source, and available to everyone. The destroyer blew the unyielding proof to pieces. A moment later, a Gran heavy cruiser, part of a tiny surviving Federation observation force, fired a single, well-aimed plasma torpedo. It struck the exact shield modulator node highlighted in the schematic. The KRYL destroyer's shields died. A follow-up shot from a Silex biocannon pierced its engine core. It exploded. A stunned silence fell over the Federation command. Another human ship died. Another data burst erupted. This one targeted a KRYL carrier. Its specific vulnerability to ionic disruption was broadcast. An Ixian science vessel, armed only with sensor arrays, reconfigured its instruments and emitted a focused ionic pulse. The carrier's fighter launch bays seized up, trapping squadrons inside. Human ships were falling, but with each death, they were not just being destroyed. They were publishing. They were turning their own destruction into a weapon of perfect, shared knowledge. They're not trying to win the battle, Vlar whispered, understanding dawning like a cold star. They're settling the debt. They're paying with their own ships to buy the galaxy the information to win the war. The human fleet was a catalyst, not a shield. Their sacrifice was a transaction. For every human ship lost, a dozen KRYL vessels were suddenly, transparently vulnerable. The Federation species, who had watched and despaired, now had the keys to the enemy's destruction handed to them in real time. The data was irresistible. A Balaxian warship, seeing a clear path to avenge its lost brothers, fired. A Tarkellan life pod, armed with nothing but a communications laser, aimed for a newly exposed coolant port on a KRYL battleship. The KRYL armada was no longer fighting one enemy. It was fighting a galaxy that could now see all its secrets. The human fleet at the center was being methodically spent, but with every loss, the KRYL's own doom was being written and distributed finally. Only the steadfast calculator and a few tenders remained, surrounded by a ring of KRYL dreadnoughts. Mira looked at the faces on her bridge. They nodded. This was the last entry. She opened a channel to the Federation frequency. This is the final entry for the Serpentis ledger. The principle of lives saved remains. But the interest for the ships lost here is now cleared. The balance shifts. The calculator broadcast its final, largest data burst. It contained the master frequency for the entire KRYL command network, and the virus J had crafted from years of listening. A virus that would turn their triumphant battle cries into the looping sounds of human distress calls and the names of the dead from Jeju 3. Then, the KRYL closed in. The screen went white. When the glare faded, the steadfast calculator was gone. But the data was everywhere. In the silence that followed, the scattered KRYL fleet was no longer a unified force. They were individual ships, each one tagged, known, and exposed to a galaxy that had just been taught exactly how to kill them. The war was not over, but for the first time, the Federation saw a path to victory, a path bought and paid for with human lives, and delivered in the form of a perfect, terrible instruction manual. The dread in the hall was now mixed with a crushing, shameful awe. Humanity had not just fought. They had calculated the exact price of victory, and they had paid it in full in front of everyone. They had turned their own annihilation into the galaxy's weapon. The obligation was not repaid. It had been transferred, and now the galaxy had to decide what to do with the payment. The silence in the Grand Conclave Hall was heavy. It was not the quiet of peace, but the quiet after a great engine has been shut down. On the main viewer, the stars near the Serpentis Nebula were calm. The last broken pieces of KRYLL ships drifted. The human fleet was gone. A single, small human transport ship, undefended and slow, entered the system and docked with the Federation station. From it emerged Jay. He wore a simple, dark suit. He carried a data crystal in one hand. His face was calm, but his eyes held the weight of the ledger. He walked through the silent corridors. Representatives of species who had once laughed at him now stepped back to let him pass. Their eyes were wide, confused, afraid. He did not look at them. He entered the hall. Every seat was filled. No one spoke. Captain Vlar stood near the speaking platform, his head bowed. Ambassador Kreen sat perfectly still, as if made of glass. Jay walked to the center. He did not step onto the platform. He stood on the main floor, looking up at them all. He placed the data crystal into a reader. A simple document appeared on the viewer. It was the final page of the ledger. On one side, a list. Every human ship lost at Serpentis. On the other side, a list. Every KRYLL capital ship confirmed destroyed in the battle, matched to the Tarkellan ship it had killed weeks before. A line was drawn between them. At the bottom, in clear text, it read, "Interest from Serpentis Nebula engagement. Balanced?" Jay spoke, his voice soft but carrying. The human obligation, known as Karva, to the Tarkellan people for the rescue at Jeju 3 is now considered fulfilled. The principle of 50,412 lives remains. That debt is held now by the KRYLL Empire. We will collect from them in time. Our business with you is concluded. He bowed, a small, precise motion. He turned to leave. Wait. The word came from Captain Vlar. The old warrior stepped forward, his movements slow. He looked at Jay, and then at the record of the battle on the screen. His own people's honor had been avenged by the sacrifice of another. You paid with your own blood, for our honor. This was not the balance we sought. Jay turned back. It was the balance required. You saved lives. We could not repay you with lives, so we repaid you with victory. It was the only currency of equal value. We are precise. Ambassador Kreen found his voice. It was thin, cracked. And now? What happens now? You have given us the tools to fight, but you have shown us a terror. You turn your own death into a weapon. What do you want? Jay looked at the Ixian for a long moment. We want nothing from you. The transaction is complete. But you asked a question. Let me answer it fully. He changed the image on the screen. It showed the simple, repeating lines of Human Reciprocity Law, Article 14. You asked, what if the debt had been one of vengeance? If you had wronged us? He let the question hang in the air. The hall grew colder. The principle is the same, Jay said. The interest compounds. We remember every slight, not with anger but with accountancy. The insult in this hall, the dismissal of our offers, the menial work given to our engineers, the laughter, it is all here. He tapped the side of his head. A separate ledger. It has not been activated. It may never be, but it exists. We are auditors, Ambassador. We measure both gratitude and grievance with the same scale. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the Balaxian, the Gran, the Silix. You now possess the complete tactical database of the KRYLL Empire. You have a clear path to victory. This was our payment. Use it well. He removed the data crystal. The screen went dark. The galaxy believed humanity was weak because we value life over pride and precision over brute force. You mistook our accounting for weakness. Now you understand the numbers. He walked toward the exit again. This time, no one stopped him. The meaning of his words settled over the hall like dust. Captain Vlar felt a shiver that had nothing to do with temperature. The humans had not come for glory or a seat at the table. They had come to pay a bill. And they had overpaid deliberately to make a point. ASJ's ship left the station. The representatives began to talk in hushed, urgent tones. Plans were made to use the human data. Strategies formed. Hope, for the first time in years, was kindled. But beneath the hope was the dread. It lived in the silence between their words. They looked at their own histories, the minor trade disputes with humanity, the ignored requests, the condescending remarks. Were they in a separate ledger? How did human compound interest work on an insult? The war with the KRYLL would be won. That was now certain. The weapon for victory had been bought and delivered. But as the galaxy moved forward, they would never look at a human the same way again. A human smile would no longer be just a smile. A human favor would no longer be just a favor. Each was a potential entry in a cosmic ledger, measured with terrifying precision. Humanity had repaid an obligation with an empire's destruction. They had shown the universe that they were neither warriors nor saints. They were the keepers of the final, perfect tab. And as Jay's ship vanished into the stars, the galaxy trembled with the understanding that the accountants were always watching, and their books were never, ever closed.